Hello, I am Magistra Fiona of Clare, and welcome to my short course on medieval drama. I regret that I'm not able to join you in person at Pennsic this year. Unfortunately, I have had the misfortune to break my elbow. But I am hoping that this recorded class will be useful to you and give you some useful information and hopefully be enjoyable. A little bit about me. Mundanely, I am a PhD in medieval English literature, and I teach at Tennessee State University. And I teach medieval drama on a pretty regular basis as part of my drama and poetry courses, and also as part of English Literature 1 and World Literature. So I teach drama on a pretty regular basis, and also I have acted a little bit. I am also in the SCA a storyteller and a bard. So I have some idea about the performance aspects. I have written scholarly papers about drama. And I also tried my hand at writing a medieval drama once. So there are a lot of things that come into this course. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email is on the screen right now. It's FionaClaire, one word, no caps, @gmail.com. There's also a handout for this course. It has 2 sides. Well, you'll see 2 pages, and you'll be able to get that where the handouts are. It is mostly definitions and also a copy of one of the few medieval staging plans we have. More about that in a few minutes. So what I'm looking to cover today, I'm going to talk about plays in the medieval period, about 500 to 1500 in the Common Era, what we know about drama in that time period, the types of plays we know about, staging and actors, plays in the early modern period, which is in English the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, about 1580 to 1649, and in Spain the Golden Age, or the Siglo de Oro. Mostly I'm going to be talking about England. This is my area of expertise, but I do know a little bit about what was going on in Spain, France, and Germany, and what was going on in late antiquity in the Roman Empire. I know there was medieval Chinese drama. I know there was medieval Japanese drama, but my knowledge of Japanese drama doesn't start till the 18th century, and I know almost nothing about Chinese drama. So please be aware of my limitations. Now, in ancient Greece and in Rome, there was a robust theatrical tradition, both comedies and tragedies. They had purpose-built theaters. And if you do a quick online search, you will find pictures of these theaters because they were outdoors. They were heavily constructed, and they were constructed for acoustics. The theater at Epidaurus is huge, but the acoustics are great, and usually they made use of natural features when they were building these amphitheaters. And there is a surviving canon of Greek and Roman drama from the ancient world, and we still study them today. Oedipus the King is one of the finest tragedies ever written. It is certainly one of the top 5 tragedies ever written around the world, and we still study it. One of my favorite comedies to teach is Lysistrata, also from the ancient Greek period, but there was an equally strong Roman tradition with writers such as Plautus in comedy and Seneca in tragedy. And those traditions survived into the medieval period because those texts were still known. However, traditionally, what we are told in our drama classes, and this was still happening when I was being trained, that when Rome fell and those big civic theaters went out of use, that drama disappeared. I don't know whether that's the truth. There were, as well as the big productions at the amphitheaters, there was an itinerant drama. And we don't know if that disappeared, but we don't have records of it. And that's the problem. You know, our knowledge is limited to the record. Now, traditionally, we are taught in our drama classes, and again, this is what I was being taught when I was trained, that drama reemerged in Europe in the 11th and 12th century with ecclesiastical drama, and that it started as part of the liturgy for Easter with the play Quem Quaeritus, which isn't really a play. It's like 3 lines. It's a bunch of monks pretending to be the women at Jesus's tomb looking for him. And another monk playing the angel saying, "Who are you looking for?" And then it grew into other liturgical plays over the course of the 11th and 12th century. Well, it turns out this is not exactly true. The earliest written plays we have after the fall of the Roman Empire in Europe were written in Germany by a woman who was a canoness in a convent. Her name is Hroswitha of Gandersheim. And they are plays in Latin. They date to the 10th century, so a century before this Quem Quaeritus drama. And we don't know if her plays were actually performed or read aloud, but they are in Latin. They show a very marked knowledge of Latin plays. So she was an educated woman who knew what she was doing with drama. And they are plays. And there was an initial doubt after finding her plays about whether or not they were genuine because A, they were written by a woman, and B, because they came about 100 years before any established drama was taking place. But they are genuine, they are written by a woman, and they are very learned. And the most famous one is Dulcidius, which is a play about the 3 martyrs, Irena and her 2 sisters. And since there is a lot of description, my professional opinion is they were probably read aloud because they describe things that you would have seen on stage if they were actually performed. But they were read with actors. It's drama. And it's earlier than people thought. Now, the types of plays we have surviving from the Middle Ages vary by country and by time, but generally they fall into about 4 categories. The first in English is called mystery plays. Mystery plays are not mysterious in any sort of way. They are plays that are based on the Bible, on episodes of the Bible. They're usually very short. And you will see a definition of the mystery plays on your handout. They are plays that are sponsored by the guilds, which were called mysters in English. And they are based on the Bible. They are pageant plays. Pageant in the sense of a Christmas pageant, not in the sense of a beauty pageant. And pageant is also on your handout. A pageant is a mystery play, a short play based on the Bible. In English, there are only 4 sets of these that survive, plus a couple odd ones here and there that survived because of the Protestant Reformation. This was a very Catholic tradition that the mystery plays in England were performed on the Feast of Corpus Christi, which is a movable feast that depends on Easter. And they told the story of the Bible from creation to the Last Judgment in little segments, each sponsored by the guilds. And they were very Catholic. So Protestant Reformation came in and censored them. And because of that, we only have 4 surviving sets, which are generally referred to as Wakefield or Townley. Wakefield is where they thought they were performed. They're not so sure now. Townley is the family that owned the manuscript. The End Town, which was a generic set where you could, fill in the blank of your town. There is the Chester cycle from the city of Chester, and the York cycle from the city of York. There are a couple of plays that survive from Coventry as well, but only a couple too. A miracle play is a play based on a saint's life or miracles after their death. And they were very popular. They were also heavily censored in English because, of course, saints aren't very Protestant. We only have a couple surviving in English, but there are some surviving in other languages, including French. In Spain, we have the Autos Sacramentales, which are plays about the miracles of the Eucharist, and they are often allegorical. In other words, and allegory is another definition on your sheet, they are symbolic, where there is actually a plot, but the plot involves allegorical characters who represent an idea or a concept. And the morality plays work on the same sort of level. They are also allegorical, where they're trying to make a moral point by having these characters portray concepts like knowledge or sin. A figure from the morality plays who shows up a lot later or is adapted by later playwrights is vice. So these morality plays, we have a couple of these left in English, including one called Everyman, which was translated apparently from Dutch. And in French and in some other languages, we have farces, basically these low comedy plays. We're talking physical comedy. We're talking fart jokes, that kind of level of comedy. We're not talking about highbrow, witty comedy, although there was certainly wit in these comedies. We're talking more about slapstick here and low-level jokes. Later in English, these survive in the tradition of Punch and Judy. And we know there were Robin Hood plays in English, but none of them survive. We have references to them. We don't have the plays themselves. It's worth saying that elements of these plays survive into the Renaissance, into the early modern period. That Lope de Vega, one of the premier dramatists in the Spanish Golden Age, the Siglo de Oro, wrote an Auto Sacramental. And Calderón de la Barca, another one of the premier playwrights of the Siglo de Oro, wrote Auto Sacramentales. Elements from the morality plays survive in Shakespeare, where there is scholarship linking figures like Iago to vice. Now, the plays, let me go back, are almost always written in verse. In whatever language you are looking at, they are almost always in poetry, and that is done for a reason. Poetry is easier to remember than prose. And the usual form in English is octosyllabic lines, eight-syllable lines, rhyming couplets or quartets. There is a playwright who is referred to as the Wakefield Master because we do not know the name of this playwright, but we can recognize the playwright's hand on several plays in the Townley or Wakefield cycle, who wrote in a very complex verse form, which is very difficult to write in. It is alliterative and has external or end rhyme and internal rhyme. It's really difficult. I know, I tried it. I was able to do it, but I'm never doing it again because it's so difficult. And these are easier to remember. Most of what we know about actors explains this, and this gets into staging. Let me talk about the staging first. There were different ways of performing plays, and it depended on where you were in Europe and what sort of spaces you had. One of the things that did die with the Roman Empire, as I said, I'm not sure that drama did, but the building of theaters went away. So plays were performed where there was space, and where there wasn't space, we made space. One of the ways that plays were performed was on wagons. In the Corpus Christi plays, these are referred to as pageants or pageant wagons. And they're not like the hay wagon at Penzic. These are more like the floats in the Rose Bowl parade. They are elaborate stages on wheels. In the city of York, they moved from place to place. So you would start and perform the creation at place A, move to place B, perform the creation again. Meanwhile, at place A, the second play in the series is being performed, and it would parade around the city, the whole Corpus Christi play. Now, in other places, we know that they didn't do the plays on pageants. They had a dedicated field or place that they set up scaffolds around. And what happened is that there was a flat area surrounded by little stages. And what would happen is most of the play is performed in the main area or place, and each scaffold represented a different location. So in the Second Shepherd's play, for instance, which is a very famous play written by the Wakefield Master, part of the Wakefield or Townley cycle, the shepherds are in the field, which is they're out in the place, but at a certain time they go to the house of a character named Mac, and Mac's house is one scaffold, and eventually they go visit baby Jesus at the stable, which is at a different scaffold. Now in Spain, they also had stage wagons. They had a stage area, or maybe something like a place, and then they had wagons around it, which were called carros. And they would use them sort of like the scaffolds in England. The universities often performed plays, and the grammar schools, by which they meant places you learn Latin and Greek grammar. And they did this, the students performed these plays as a way of learning Latin and Greek. So they were performed in university halls and school halls. They were also, we think, performed inside residential halls. Basically, any place there was space. So if You had traveling players, they might be performing in the Lord's Great Hall, they might be performing in the courtyard of the inn. There were stage effects and costumes. We know this from the records of early English drama. We have records of how much were spent on stage effects and costumes. And they were pretty expensive. And costumes were one of the assets of a traveling theater company. So they treated them very well. And sometimes, because actors were allowed to wear things that ordinary people would not be able to wear because of their social status, sometimes they were donated by lords or ladies or people of higher social status to the traveling companies, especially if the traveling company was sponsored by a lord, and that they would be treasured. Their special effects were very amateurish by our standards of special effects, but they did have special effects. They had blood bags, what we would call blood bags now. We know that they sometimes used red ribbons to simulate blood. There were machines to raise and lower people into or out of the heavens. They looked kind of like swings. I have also seen a recreation where somebody appearing and disappearing in a room is done by a trick door. So they had all kinds of stage effects. They weren't very sophisticated, but they were stage effects. Now, here is a picture of a performance of the York Corpus Christi play. This is the crucifixion pageant. As you can see, if you follow my mouse, they're literally on a wagon and performing the crucifixion. The particular staging of this pageant did not work because the actors were not facing the audience, and also because the cross was not facing the audience. There was also a strange thing, because in the York play, Jesus is crucified over the course of several plays. So this play stopped with Jesus being put on the cross, and then to go to the next station, they have to get Jesus off the cross and then lower the cross to go to the next station. So the effect of Jesus being put on the cross is sort of lost when Jesus hops down off the cross. But this is a portable stage. Here's another pageant wagon. You can see the top of the wagon here where I am pointing. This is the play of Cain and Abel. This one was performed in masks, which is something we know was done. And also that God here is represented by this puppet head, although there were actors on stage who would play God, and certainly God would have been played in a mask. Oh, I went backwards, excuse me. Now, here is one of the few period examples of a stage plan. This is on your handout. Both the original manuscript and also the one that is transcribed and rendered into modern English. So this is place and scaffold. This big circular plane is the place where most of the action takes place. Here is scaffold 1. This is the scaffold for the castle. This is the play called The Castle of Perseverance. And they have 4 scaffolds going around, actually 5. This scaffold is for covetousness. This one is for God's scaffold. And one thing I don't understand about this is where the audience goes. Because if you put an audience, let's say here, over with God's scaffold, this castle's in the way, they can't see what's going on in this scaffold. So this is also famous, by the way, for its talk about staging and special effects. That the character Belial, we are told in this stuff here, shall have fireworks coming out of his hands and out of his butt. That had to be rather toasty for the actor in question. But they were doing special effects. They were doing a pretty serious costume here. Now, about actors. Until 1660 in England and 1587 in Spain, all the actors were male, but there is, during the medieval period, records of a female actor in Germany who was playing Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and apparently did such a good job that the local nobleman's son married her. France also had female actors before 1660. But generally, until 1660 in England and 1587 in Spain, men were playing the women's parts. There are two schools of thoughts about the men who played the women's parts. There are some people who believe that the young boys, the apprentices in the company, whose voice had not changed, were playing the female parts. And there are people who believe that there were specially trained men who trained their falsetto voice and played all the female parts. I think it is probably a combination of the two. That it is certainly making sense to have Hero in Much Ado About Nothing, and maybe Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, played by a young apprentice boy. It doesn't make sense for Lady Macbeth, who is a more sophisticated and older character. So I think it's probably a combination of both. Acting companies traveled. They had repertoires. They did their own plays. Those plays were carefully guarded because they were an asset to the company. And they were professionals. Now, we know there were professional actors who had dedicated theaters, a little more about that in the next slide, by the time of the early modern period. But we also know that during the medieval period, there were professional acting companies, and they were good. In the city of York, there are records of professional actors being hired for the Corpus Christi play, and you did not want to hire a bad actor because there was a fine of 30 shillings if your play was bad. York took their Corpus Christi play seriously because it was a tourism draw and brought money and trade to the city. So despite the fact that in the Shakespeare play A Midsummer Night's Dream, we see this play being put on by a bunch of tradesmen, and it is horribly bad. It is like the worst high school play ever, and with the worst actors ever. But this is Shakespeare's propaganda. Shakespeare wants to make those Corpus Christi plays look bad because Shakespeare is a professional actor who is trying to get people to come to the professional theater in which he is invested and will make money, rather than go to the civic pageants, which are free. So he has a built-in bias to make fun of the mystery plays, the Corpus Christi plays, and the other civic pageants. But the fact is that they were not badly done in general, that the guild spent a lot of money on props, on actors, on costumes to make those plays really stand out. And we have records of that. Now, during what we would call late period, what is technically now referred to as the early modern period in Europe, we have the return of purpose-built theaters. We still have traveling companies who are performing in courtyards, who are performing in the Lord's halls. We still have the university acting going on in the university halls. But we have the return of purpose-built theaters in England. The Red Lion is the first one in 1567, the aptly named theater in 1576, and in 1579 we start getting them built in Spain. These theaters are outdoors because we don't have a lot of sophisticated lighting yet. And of course, we famously have the Globe in England, which they have recreated. It stands about a couple hundred yards from where the original one stood in period. It is done as authentically as they can without breaking fire codes. And it is really worth the trip. If you are ever in London, go to see a play in the Globe and, revel in that space. It's another space where they do not use microphones, and they do not have to, because the acoustics are good and because the actors are trained. Now, there's a lot of drama going on in late period in England. They don't call it the Golden Age in England, but they really should. There are all sorts of people writing plays. There's plays being written at the university level. There are the humanists writing plays in the beginning of the Renaissance. And then you have the great Elizabethan and Jacobean professional playwrights like Shakespeare, like Christopher Marlowe, like Ben Jonson, like Thomas Middleton, Thomas Dekker. Shakespeare was the greatest of them, but there were a lot of really great playwrights and a lot of great comedies. There is the beginning of what we would call sitcoms. And there is a lot of borrowing of plots because copyright didn't exist, but Ben Jonson's comedies were only performed by Ben Jonson's company. Shakespeare's company are the only ones, the King's Men, who performed Shakespeare's dramas because they were competing against each other. Now, in Spain, we also have this huge flowering of drama in the Siglo de Oro with these amazing playwrights. Cervantes, the same Cervantes who wrote Don Quixote. Calderón de la Barca, Lope de Vega, who is like the father of Spanish drama. They are writing plays. And as I said before, we start to get female actors. Now, that is all I have for you today. Do take a look at the handout, which gives more detailed definitions of some of the things I brought up. You also have on the back or the second page of the handout that stage plan if you want to look at it in more detail. And I'd be happy to hear from you. My Email again is fionnaclaire@gmail.com. And I hope to see you live and in person next Pensic.